Welcome in, everybody. Today we're going to be diving into Blink. You know that Malcolm Gladwell book all about snap judgments and first impressions?
Oh yeah, classic.
You bet. So we'll be exploring all that research on how we make decisions in the blink of an eye,
Those split-second decisions.
and why those quick decisions can be shockingly accurate sometimes.
Right. Sometimes amazingly on target.
Or sometimes completely wrong, disastrously wrong even.
Yeah, Blink really challenges that assumption that more information always leads to better decisions, right?
That's what makes it so interesting. Gladwell calls it thin slicing. Like
Thin slicing.
where our brains kind of pick up these patterns and all the chaos and make sense of things with very little information.
It's incredible how our minds do that.
It really is. So let's jump right in with that story about the fake statue.
Yes. The Getty Kuros.
The Getikoros.
Perfect example of how expert intuition can sometimes be more powerful than scientific analysis.
So to set the scene, the Getty Museum acquired this ancient Greek statue.
A Kuros.
Yeah, Koro spent a ton of money on it.
Millions.
And they did all these scientific tests to make sure it was authentic.
Carbon dating, all sorts of analyses.
But then the art experts got a look at it.
Yeah, and there was this immediate wave of doubt.
Like, something's not right here.
From top art historians, museum curators.
Even though the science said it was real.
It was really interesting how they just felt it in their gut.
And they were right. The statue was a fake, a forgery.
It really was.
So how were those experts able to thin slice so well?
Well, it's like anything else. Experience counts for a lot.
Right.
Years of experience
Right.
give those experts sort of like mental shortcuts.
Mental shortcuts.
They're able to see patterns that are invisible to the untrained eye.
So like a chess master.
Exactly. A chess master can look at the board and just know the best move instantly.
It's not like they're calculating every single possibility.
Right. It's intuition honed through years of practice.
So it's a skill.
Absolutely. Gladwell's point is that anyone can cultivate this ability to thin slice.
So we can train ourselves to make better snap judgments.
You got it. It's not some magical gift.
That's great to hear, because I make a lot of snap judgments.
Uh-huh. We all do.
Gladwell uses the example of John Gottman, the marriage researcher.
Oh, yeah. Fascinating guy.
He can supposedly predict if a couple will get divorced with, like, crazy accuracy.
Remarkable accuracy.
Just by observing them for a short time.
It's incredible.
I read something like 90% accuracy from just 15 minutes of observation.
Yeah, he's analyzed thousands of hours of couples interacting, looking for those patterns and how they communicate their emotional responses.
So he's basically figured out the signature of a healthy relationship or a troubled one.
It's like a code he's cracked.
Wow. So even something as complex as a relationship has these telltale signs.
Exactly. And those signs, those signatures, they can show up in the most unexpected places.
Like what?
Well, Gladwell talks about this study with dorm rooms.
Oh, yeah, where researchers could predict a student's personality just from their dorm room.
You got it. They found that the way we arrange our stuff, the things we choose to display, even the posters on our walls,
They all say something about us.
unconsciously they reveal these patterns about who we are.
It's like our dorm room is a microcosm of our lives.
I like that, a microcosm. And it really highlights the power of thin slicing, but it also brings up this important point,
What's that?
that snap judgments can be wrong.
Of course they can be wrong.
And that's when we get what Gladwell calls Warren Harding errors.
Right. The classic example of Warren G. Harding becoming president based on his looks.
Yeah, despite not really having the qualifications.
So a Warren Harding error is basically when we let superficial factors like appearance cloud our judgment.
Often without even realizing it. It's unconscious bias.
And it happens everywhere, not just in politics.
Oh yeah, Gladwell talks about car salesmen, right?
Yeah, I remember that, where car salesmen tend to offer worse deals to women and minorities.
Exactly. Showing how snap judgments, while efficient, can be fueled by prejudice.
And have real-world consequences.
With real impact.
It's a good reminder that first impressions can be deceiving.
Absolutely. Which is why it's so crucial to be aware of our biases and how they might be shaping our perceptions.
So how do we do that? How do we become more aware of our biases?
That's a big question,
Right.
and one we'll keep exploring, but it also raises this other fascinating question.
What's that?
Can we learn to read people more accurately?
Mm.
Like, can we get better at understanding those subtle cues that reveal what someone's really thinking or feeling?
It's like mind reading.
Haha, kinda.
Yeah.
And Gladwell dives into this with the work of Paul Ekman and his research on microexpressions, fleeting facial expressions that flash across our faces in milliseconds.
So fast you can barely see them.
Exactly. And they can betray our true emotions even when we're trying to hide them.
It's like our faces have a secret language.
That's a great way to put it, and Ekman became this master translator of that language.
Wow, so he could actually read people's minds.
Well, not quite, but he did use microexpressions to identify a spy.
A real spy.
Yeah, he analyzed footage of this suspected double agent named Kim Philby.
And what did he see?
He spotted what he calls duping delight, this subtle smirk that indicates deception.
So even these tiny involuntary expressions can tell us a lot.
A lot more than we realize. It's amazing how much information is conveyed in those brief moments.
But I imagine even mind reading has its limits, right?
You're absolutely right. And it's important to remember that these techniques aren't foolproof. Even the best experts can get it wrong.
And sometimes the consequences can be tragic.
Exactly. And that brings us to the heartbreaking case of Amadou Diallo.
This is a really powerful example of how snap judgments, especially under pressure, can lead to devastating consequences.
It's a story that really highlights the dangers of thin slicing gone wrong.
So remind us what happened with Amadou Diallo.
Amadou Diallo was an unarmed black man who was tragically shot and killed by police officers in New York City.
It was a case of mistaken identity, right?
Sadly, yes. The officers mistook his wallet for a gun.
And they fired 41 shots.
A truly horrific event that sparked outrage and protests across the country.
So how does this relate to Blink?
Well, it illustrates how our snap judgments can be heavily influenced by fear, stress, and implicit bias. Gladwell points out that under extreme stress, our brains essentially go into this tunnel vision mode.
Like we're hyper-focused on a threat.
Our attention narrows, and we miss crucial information that might help us make a more accurate assessment of the situation.
So how do we reconcile this with the idea that we can train ourselves to make better snap judgments?
It's a complex issue, but I think Blink suggests that awareness is key.
Awareness of our own biases and the limitations of our perceptions.
Absolutely. We need to recognize that while intuition can be a powerful tool, it's not infallible.
It's about finding that balance between trusting our gut and being critical of our assumptions.
Exactly. And being aware of the context in which we're making those judgments.
So context matters a lot.
It's crucial. The same snap judgment that might be accurate in one situation could be completely wrong in another.
That makes sense. So are there ways to create systems or environments that help us make better snap judgments?
That's a really interesting question. And Gladwell actually provides a great example of this with the way orchestras overcame gender bias.
The blind auditions, right?
Exactly. For years, orchestras were overwhelmingly male.
Because there was this assumption that women just weren't as good musicians.
It was a deeply ingrained bias.
But once orchestras started using blind auditions where musicians played behind a screen hiding their identity,
Things changed dramatically.
suddenly the number of women in orchestras skyrocketed.
It was a game changer. By removing the visual cues, the judges were forced to evaluate the music solely on its merits.
So a simple screen helped level the playing field.
It's a powerful example of how structural changes can lead to more objective decisions.
And how unconscious bias can creep into even the most seemingly objective processes.
You got it. It's a reminder that we need to be constantly vigilant about our biases and look for ways to mitigate their influence.
So we've gone from ancient statues to car dealerships to orchestras, all examples of how snap judgments can be both incredibly accurate and dangerously misleading.
It's been quite a journey, and it just goes to show that Blink is about so much more than just interesting anecdotes.
It's about understanding how our minds work and how we can make better decisions in all areas of our lives.
Exactly. It's a fascinating exploration of the power and the peril of those first 2 seconds.
And we've only just scratched the surface. In the next part of our deep dive into Blink, we'll delve into some of the psychological mechanisms behind those snap judgments.
We'll talk about priming the idea that even subtle cues can influence our behavior without us realizing it.
And we'll explore the fascinating story of Paul Van Riper, the maverick Marine Corps general, who challenged traditional military thinking with his reliance on intuition and rapid decision-making.
It's going to be a mind-bending ride, so stay tuned for more insights from Blink. All right, so picking up where we left off, Blink also delves into some of the psychological mechanisms that drive our snap judgments.
Yeah, like priming.
Priming, exactly. That's the idea that even these subtle cues can influence our behavior without us even knowing it.
I remember that example from the book,
Which one?
with the students and the word puzzle.
Oh, yeah. Where they were given this word puzzle filled with words associated with old age.
Like Florida bingo wrinkle.
Exactly. And afterward, those students actually walked down the hallway slower.
It's wild, like their subconscious minds absorb that concept of old age.
and has subtly influenced their movements.
Wow, it's kind of freaky.
It is a little bit unnerving, right? Makes you wonder how much control we really have.
Yeah, like are we just puppets of our unconscious minds?
Well, not exactly, but it does highlight the need to be aware of the environments we're in and the messages they might be sending us.
I'll have to pay more attention to that.
Me too.
Mm.
But let's get back to decision-making for a second. Another key idea from Blink is that we're not always good at explaining our snap judgments.
Yeah, I remember that part about the speed dating experiment.
Yes. The researchers were trying to get people to analyze why they felt attracted to certain people.
But it didn't really work, did it?
Nope. When participants were forced to explain their preferences, they often fumbled and contradicted themselves.
Their reasons didn't match their choices.
Exactly. It's like we make a decision based on gut feeling,
And then our conscious minds try to come up with a story to explain it.
a story that might be totally off. And sometimes overthinking those gut feelings can actually lead to worse decisions.
So sometimes it's better not to overanalyze.
Sometimes, yeah.
Uh,
Which brings us to the fascinating example of Paul Van Riper.
the Marine Corps general.
General Van Riper, that's right.
Right.
A real maverick who was a huge advocate for intuition and quick thinking.
He believed that in war, you can't always rely on data and analysis.
Especially in the heat of the moment.
He famously said, war is inherently unpredictable, messy, and nonlinear.
And he put that philosophy to the test during the Millennium Challenge war game.
That was a massive military exercise.
Huge. The blue team, representing the U.S., had all this cutting-edge technology and favored a data-driven approach.
And Van Riper led the red team.
Yeah, and he took a completely different approach.
Didn't he use, like, motorcycle couriers to communicate instead of relying on those sophisticated systems?
He did. He knew the blue team would try to target their communication networks.
Clever.
And he surprised them with all sorts of unconventional tactics.
Like that move with the small boats.
Oh yeah, he simulated a swarm of small boats to overwhelm their defenses.
And he basically sank a fleet of American warships.
It was a stunning victory. A real David versus Goliath moment.
That shook the military establishment.
Big time. It was a powerful lesson in what Gladwell calls creating structure for spontaneity.
So it wasn't just about acting impulsively.
No, it was about creating an environment where rapid cognition and intuition could thrive.
That's interesting. So how do we apply that to our own lives?
Well, think about professions where split-second decisions are crucial.
Like firefighters.
Firefighters, exactly. Or emergency medicine surgery. Those kinds of fields.
Where there's no time for lengthy analysis.
You have to act on instinct.
Gladwell mentions that firefighter who had a sixth sense for danger.
Oh yeah, the one who ordered his men out of a burning building just moments before the floor collapsed.
And he couldn't even explain why he did it.
But his intuition saved their lives.
Wow. So in those high-stress situations, our unconscious minds can really pick up on things that our conscious minds miss.
That's right. It's like those blink moments of insight.
But there's a balance, isn't there? Because Gladwell also talks about the dangers of overthinking things.
The perils of introspection, as he calls it.
Right. Like when we try to dissect those gut feelings too much, we might actually mess things up.
We can disrupt the very process that led to the insight.
So sometimes you just got to go with your gut.
Sometimes, yeah. It's about finding that sweet spot between instinct and analysis.
Easier said than done, though, right? How do we get better at making those snap judgments without falling prey to bias and making those Warren Harding errors?
That's the million-dollar question. Is there a formula for becoming a more effective thin slicer?
I wish there was an easy answer.
Me too.
Yeah.
But it seems to be a combination of experience knowledge and a willingness to challenge our assumptions.
So like Bob Galome, the car salesman Gladwell profile?
Oh, yeah. Bob Galum, but he's known for being incredibly fair and transparent with all his customers.
He doesn't judge a book by its cover.
Exactly. He's learned through years of experience that those initial impressions can be misleading.
So he's trained himself to override those automatic unconscious biases.
And that's a skill we can all work on.
It's encouraging to know that we can improve.
Absolutely. By becoming more aware of our biases and focusing on the relevant information, we can refine our snap judgments and make them more accurate and fair.
That reminds me of those flavor experts Gladwell talks about, Gail Vance Civil and Judy Hallman.
Oh yeah, the pace testers.
They can break down a food's flavor profile with incredible precision.
They've developed this incredibly sophisticated vocabulary for describing their sensory experiences.
Like in that jam and mayonnaise tasting.
Right. They can analyze a sample and break it down into dozens of attributes. appearance, texture, aroma, taste.
And articulate all those nuances in detail.
Exactly. So their expertise isn't just about having a refined palate.
It's about having the language to understand and communicate those perceptions.
Precisely. And that's where the Warren Harding error comes in.
Yeah.
If we rely on vague, superficial impressions, we're more likely to be misled. But if we cultivate a deeper understanding of the relevant factors...
Our snap judgments become much more reliable.
Exactly. It's about moving beyond those surface-level judgments and delving into the details.
So how do we apply that to other areas of life, like evaluating job candidates or even potential romantic partners?
And that's a fascinating question. Could we develop a more nuanced vocabulary for making those assessments?
It makes you think.
It does. And it gets at the heart of Blink, becoming more conscious and deliberate in our decision-making, both big and small.
But sometimes those snap judgments, especially the ones informed by experience, can be more accurate than data, right?
Oh, absolutely. Remember the case of Kenna the musician?
The one who couldn't seem to break through to mainstream success?
Yes. All the experts loved his music. They had that Blink moment, that gut feeling that he was going to be huge.
But the market research didn't support it.
It's a classic example of the limitations of data, especially when it comes to something as subjective as music.
So the experts were right to trust their gut.
In that case, it seems so. Their intuition was telling them something that the data wasn't capturing.
It's a reminder that human judgment can sometimes be more insightful than cold, hard data.
Especially when that judgment is grounded in experience and expertise.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Thin slicing, priming Warren Harding errors, the importance of context.
We've been all over the map.
What would you say is the most important takeaway from Blink so far?
That's a tough one. But I think the key message is that snap judgments are a double-edged sword.
They can be both brilliant and dangerous.
Exactly. It's about understanding the power and the pitfalls of those first 2 seconds.
So how do we harness that power and avoid the pitfalls? What can we as individuals do?
Well, the first step is awareness. We need to acknowledge the biases that can skew our perceptions.
And learn to question our assumptions.
You got it. It's
Yeah.
not just about trusting our gut. It's about knowing when to trust our gut and when to dig deeper.
Makes sense. I think Blink really challenges us to look at all our snap judgments
Big and small.
with a new level of awareness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to understand that those first impressions, while often useful,
Right, they can be helpful.
can also be clouded by prejudice, stereotypes, misinformation, all sorts of things.
So it's not just about trusting our gut.
It's about knowing when to trust our gut and when to dig a little deeper.
One, to question those initial reactions.
Exactly. And that's really the key takeaway from Blink, in my opinion.
That we have more control over our snap judgments than we think.
More than we realize.
Yeah.
It's not just this random thing that happens to us.
We can actually train ourselves to become better thin slicers.
Exactly. By understanding how our minds work
Recognizing our biases.
and practicing that skill of making quick, accurate judgments.
It's empowering.
It is. It means we can make better decisions, build stronger relationships, and even create a more just and equitable world.
All by understanding the power of Blink.
The power of those first 2 seconds.
Well said.
Right.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Blink today,
We've covered a lot of ground.
we've explored those snap judgments,
The good, the bad, the ugly.
the influence of our unconscious mind,
All those hidden forces shaping our decisions.
and the importance of finding that balance between instinct and analysis.
That sweet spot between gut feeling and deliberate thought.
And as always, we want to leave you with something to think about. So take some time today and pay attention to those gut feelings.
Those Blink moments.
What snap judgments are you making?
And what's influencing those decisions.
By becoming more aware of those subtle cues, you can start to refine your intuition.
And make your blinks more insightful and effective.
Great advice. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of Blink.
It's been a pleasure. Until next time, everyone, keep those snap judgments in check.